Good morning. Thank you all for joining me and for staff putting this together. A lot of announcements since we last met for the Ask Me Anything. One is that the Teasers Board and the Elders Board, which are the pension trustee boards, voted last week to lower the assumed rate of return on the state pension plan and the local pension plan, except for the small change that we made last year. This is the first real change that has happened in the last 40 years in terms of lowering the assumed rate of return. It's ironic, and any of those on the call that were in that meeting that day also may have seen that we engaged with a new actuarial firm, and the firm that we engaged with when the gentleman came up to give his opening remarks said that he was having deja vu. And the reason is that he sat before that very board 19 years ago and suggested that this return be lowered 19 years ago. So we were grateful. I, as chair of the board, and the board voted that we're not going to be a part of kicking the can down the road anymore as far as these assumed rates of return. Last week, as some of you knew, I was in New York talking to the rating agencies because we're getting ready to go back into the bond market with a $400 million issuance of bonds for the Connect NC bonds. And those meetings went extremely well. Be glad to answer questions on that. The other press release was we had unfortunately had a person who was taking, and you can insert any word in that you like into that, his deceased mother's pension check since basically the turn of the century. This person, we had a grand jury seated. Thanks to Lauren Freeman and the State Bureau of Investigation, the Wake County District Attorney's Office, this person was charged with bilking the system out of $266,000 over the last 15 years. We completed our audit of our eligibility audit, and we have a lot of stuff going on, and with that I'll open up for questions.
Who wants to hold the first question?
Well, this is Dan Way. I'll take a shot at it. Treasurer Fall, I'm interested in the audit that you did. As I understand it, there was only about 1% of all those who were enrolled that had some questionable activity, maybe, or some ineligible dependents.
Right.
I'm wondering, since there was so much time in between these audits, what are you going to be doing as a daily routine, a daily practice to try and ferret these things out without having to do such a massive undertaking in the future?
Great question. As the keeper of the public purse and people on this call knowing the hundreds of billions of dollars of responsibilities that we have at the Treasurer's Office, we're trying to put policies and procedures in place that change the behavior of whatever problem we're trying to fix. And this goes to Dan, to your question. Number one, we insisted on this audit producing something we call a living, breathing document. An audit like this has been done in the past, but there's really no record of it anywhere. We wanted a living, breathing document so that if you have a 10-year-old and you're a state employee and you have verified that that child is yours, no matter where you work in state government, we'll never have to ask you for that information again. So that was the number one requirement. On top of that, I should say is that our hope was that we would do an enrollment audit and find that everybody that was supposed to be on this plan was supposed to be on this plan. And obviously that wasn't the case for one reason or the other. The second thing that was very important to us is that portability, as I said earlier, not only a living, breathing document, even though you might stay in one agency your whole career, if you transferred from agency to agency, we wanted this documentation to follow you. The third most important thing is that, and which may have occurred in the last time this happened, is that we didn't want people who got disqualified from a verification standpoint and then they just re-enrolled in the state health plan in the next open enrollment date like nothing ever happened. So the third thing is we want to make sure that people who were deemed ineligible for permanent reasons, like their kid's 27 or they're no longer married to that individual, we wanted that to be an issue so that we have procedures and policies in place that keep people from just simply going back through the open enrollment process and getting the people on the plan. But the most important thing, in which we have not had the time to do yet, is we want to look at what the experience, the cost of these folks on the state health plan were, because most of the feedback that I've gotten since this news hit is, what are you going to do to these individuals? Especially those who willingly and knowingly were trying to defraud the state health plan. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but it's on the tip of my mind, I can tell you that. And I'll be glad to answer any follow-up question, Dan, if I didn't answer your question first time.
Well, that was my next question. If you had a sum total on how much the system might have lost because of that, and whether there were going to be any future charges.
Yeah. Well, you know, we have statutes on the books that allow us to go after folks like this, and you know, as I've said on this call before, we don't pick and choose which laws to apply, and we do not pick and choose which people to apply them to. It's important to understand that you know, this plan, as I've said before, is as large as the combined domestic employment base of Berkshire Hathaway, Amazon, and J.P. Morgan. The numbers of dependents that were disenrolled for lack of verification, in terms of our percentage, it was lower than in private industry standards, but there's a really good reason for that. We just did the audit of the dependents. We should have procedures and policies in place that no one is on the state health plan that is not an active or a bona fide retiree. So our percentages were lower because we were just verifying the dependents on the plan. The second thing is that in many instances in private industry, they have procedures and policies in place that says, for example, if your spouse is entitled to health care elsewhere, then they need to avail themselves of that. If you think about what that would mean, then obviously if you did an enrollment audit at a major corporation in North Carolina that had that policy, they would obviously find a lot more people who weren't supposed to be on the plan. So most of our focus was on obviously spouses and dependents, because we do not have that policy in place in the state health plan. That policy simply being that if your spouse is eligible for insurance at some other place, then they need to avail themselves of that. That policy does not exist in North Carolina.
Is that something you might be considering looking at in the future?
Well, there's so much juice right now in the things that we're focusing on. Our main focus is not to get distracted in the fact that we have to cut $300 million worth of expenses out of this plan. We need to educate the members of this plan what it really costs them. We need to educate them on what the value of these benefits are. We need to get them to turn them from being participants to watchdogs. So those are our major goals right now.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. We have another question this morning?
Yeah, hi. Hello. Sorry. Good morning, Treasurer.
Hey.
I wanted to ask about, now that the return assumption has been lowered, what other steps are you taking to boost investment gains? Like, are there more negotiations with managers, more fee cuts planned, additions to other asset classes?
Well, every week, or probably every month, every 2 weeks, I'm signing an amendment to lower a fee, number one. So those fee reductions keep coming in as we've changed the culture of the Treasurer's office so that there's a high focus on that. Number two, we need to make sure, as I said in my earlier remarks, that we're not paying out benefits to people that don't deserve them. It's a big deal because it's one and it's a dollar, and sometimes it's good just to focus on that. But as far as the asset allocation has not changed since I've become the treasurer. We were paid out $1.5 billion in benefits in the first 90 days. Our investment returns were zero, and obviously a week doesn't make a quarter, doesn't make a month. Doesn't make a year, doesn't make 5 years. But it's always important to keep an eye on the cash flow. we are paying out these distributions out of the fixed income side of the shop. And so that's affecting the denominator just slightly, as you can probably imagine. 1.5 billion is 1.5% of $100 billion. So asset allocation hadn't changed, and we're continuing to monitor and the investments that are in the portfolio currently. And obviously there are a lot of crystallizations that are occurring across all asset classes, where managers are cashing out and sending us our money back.
Okay, so any plans to replace these managers then, now since they're cashing out?
We are consolidating some managers and giving some managers more money as we look at opportunities to be in the same investment strategy and take advantage of our buying power. Our focus obviously right now is that we're sitting on about $4 billion in-house index. That will, as you already know, is going to be ramping up to somewhere between $13 to $14 billion by the end of the year. So our focus is on making sure that happens. If that occurs, I'll retract that word. When it occurs, not if. When that occurs, nearly 50% of the assets will be managed in-house. And then the passive team is going to be looking at other types of opportunities to lower fees and manage other types of strategies in-house also.
Okay, and just my last question, how much money does the General Assembly have to add to the pension funds after the assumption was lowered?
I think I know the answer to that question, but I think it deserves a certified answer, not just an ad-lib answer. And the reason is that we're doing the 5-year smoothing. Obviously, as you know, as well as anyone, that any time that you lower the assumed rate of return and your plan is well funded, it actually costs you something. When you're not well funded and you lower your assumed rate of return, you weren't funding it anyway. So I will get you the answer to that. But to give you something to sort of think about, 5 basis points, I think for the teasers plan was $60 or $70 million, and I think for the elders plan was about $30 million a year. But I want to give you the exact number for the total retirement system, and also tell you how we expect that to be funded. We did this in consultation with the governor's office, the OSBM director, the Speaker of the House, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, physical research staff, and the League of Municipalities and the County Commissioner Association, who they themselves, we have other plans that we're responsible for, but they're the bulk of the plans, and the big expense, which is the basis of your question, is going to be directed at them. And our team here will get this answer and send it out to everybody on the call.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think, Hazel, did you have a question as well?
No, not at this point. It was just more about the 19 years ago, about why it took 19 years. But does it boil down to just having everybody agree to find the extra money, or is there more to it than that?
Well, generally speaking, not to cast aspersions on any previous treasurer, everybody on this call knows that when you lower the assumed rate of return, the fundedness of the plan drops. Treasurers are known for a lot of things across the country, but those that have responsibility for the debt and those that have responsibility for the pension plan, the two marquee things that they're normally associated with is what is your bond rating for the state that you manage, and what is the fundedness of your pension plan. So it's a counterintuitive thing for an elected official to do something that shows that one of their major responsibilities is less funded than it was last year. And that I'm not being critical or harsh, it's just the math. When we lower the assumed rate of return, the fundedness of this plan drop 2 to 3% instantly. But the fact is, as you know really well, the rating agencies, and I apologize to all of them for getting these confused, but Fitch's is, when we were meeting with them to talk about this bond issue we have coming up, they're pouring our assets through a 6% filter. Standard & Poor's and Fitch and Moody's are pouring our assets through a filter that's even a lower assumed rate of return than 6. So I thought that, as the press release points out, I appreciate the courage of our board and the fact that we're not going to kick this can down the road anymore, and that we've worked out with the funding bodies, both local and state, so that we can manage this and ensure that North Carolina remains one of the 5 best funded pension plans, if not better than just the top 5 in the United States.
Well, I have a question about the 6% then, because was it 6% before and after you lowered your assumed rate?
The 6%, I always have all these props here. There was a bulletin or something that Fitch put out last year that talked about they're going to be lowering their assumed rates of return on all their business where they're analyzing the security and solvency of the states or the local entities. So that's a Fitch report that came out in 2017, which I'm sure you can punch up pretty easily. But I want to make sure that I'm getting to your question. So they have been far out ahead of all the states on this issue for a long period of time. And obviously, the fundedness of the pension plan is not the only thing that they use to determine whether you get a AAA bond rating. There's a myriad of other factors. It's just one of those. But as you've heard me say in the past, Hazel, we're a military-friendly state, and in the military there's a term called II, and a lot of people use it, but what it means is, when you say that word, is that you hear what the person's saying to you, you understand what they're saying to you, and you're doing something about what they've asked you to do. That's what II means. And lowering this assumed rate of return was my salute to the rating agencies, that we understand, we hear what they're saying, we understand exactly what they're saying, and we did something about it.
Yeah, but my question is, does it change, if they use 6%, you could lower it to anything, and it would still be 6%, they would still count 6%.
Yeah, you need to read their guidelines on that, and but I can't. Once again, if our plan was 35% funded, I could lower it to 5% because we weren't funding it to start with. So the better funded your plan is, the harder it is to lower it. But I'm proud of our staff. I'm proud of the analysis we did. I'm proud of our board, and I think we're telling the truth and doing the right thing. And the chips fall where they may is that the fact the pension plan funded this dropped by 2 to 3%. But we weren't fooling anyone, and it was the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Hazel. Kern, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if the treasurer could comment on the recent rules review tuition ruling and how that impact will have on school districts and pension plans.
Thank you, Kuhn. Glad to have you with us. I want to be crystal clear on the spiking issue, which, by the way, there was an article in the New York Times recently about Iowa or Oregon, and it wasn't all about spiking, but it had a lot to do with this issue. I want to be crystal clear that it is not within my constitutional or statutory authority or duty to tell any unit of government, whether it's the governor's cabinet or the county of Wake or the city of Raleigh or some water and sewer district. It is not within my responsibilities and duties to tell them what they should pay somebody. It is within my responsibility if they adjust somebody's salary in such a way that they spike their pension, and then they expect the other 890,000 people in this plan to pay for that spike, then that is within my constitutional and statutory responsibility and duty. So we were very grateful about the Rules Review Commission approving this, both for the Elgers and the teasers. All we're doing, as I said in the earlier part of the call, is we don't pick and choose which laws to apply or who to apply them to. This is a law that's been on the books. It was done so by the previous treasurer, and the fact is that generally speaking, not when you have a custodian who becomes a supervisor or a private who might become a corporal in a police department, but generally speaking, these spiking cases are people that are in power or know people who are in power, and it's their business to determine what somebody should make in their organization. But it's our business when those decisions start to negatively impact the invisible losers, who are all the other people in this pension plan who are asked to pay for this increased pension for this one individual. So it's about visible winner, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of invisible losers, and that's why that we are glad to be connected with the Attorney General's office, who's representing us in this case. This case will come before the Court of Appeals in the next 2 weeks, and we are excited about the Rules Review Commission and their approval of this, and we look forward to moving forward and putting this behind us. But I'll end where I started. It is not my position, constitutional, statutorily, to tell anybody what they should pay somebody. It is my responsibility when that has a negative impact on all the other people in this plan who are paying for that decision.
If I could follow up on that, since I'm not sure if you can really comment on an individual case such as in Wake County, but obviously they've said that in school districts that because a lot of their senior administrators started their careers as teachers, their salaries dramatically went up over time. Is the system that's in there unfair to those districts who are paying their superintendents and other top-level associate superintendents and people like that?
I think I heard you say, it was kind of muffled at the beginning, that specific to the Wake County case. Once again, it's not. It is not within my responsibilities to tell anybody what they pay anyone at any level of government, or state or local. It is my responsibility to protect the pension plan, to make sure that those decisions do not negatively affect all the other people in the pension plan who may not have that opportunity in their career. We don't mind whether they do it or not, is their decision. We just want them to pay their bill, and that's what we're doing in terms of administering the law. And that's what we've done. It's obviously it's an issue that is becoming it's national. This is becoming a national story. It's something that I started talking about almost 10 years ago. The previous treasurer put the law into place, and I'm enforcing the law that was dutifully passed by the House and the Senate of North Carolina and ratified. And that's what I'll continue to do. The other issue is that, so anyway, I'll be glad to take a follow-up question, Kuhn, if you have one.
No, just saying, is the system more unfair in school systems which might have, leaders who have such a large increase in their pay compared to maybe some other government entities which may not see people make that large a rise in their salary over time?
In my opinion, the system was unfair to the invisible losers who didn't know this was being done to them. You've seen the math in, for example, the Johnston County case, which occurred before I became treasurer of North Carolina, and you'll have to look over your documents, but I believe that was $11,000 of what we call other expenses, maybe cell phone, maybe it was a car allowance, maybe it was etc. And that $11,000 was rolled into the final year's compensation of the person who retired, and it created nearly a $500,000 pension spike. That's not the pension. That's just the increase in the pension over that person's life expectancy. That $500,000 increase in that person's pension over their life expectancy was little bit by little bit was being paid for by everyone else in the plan who did not know that was happening.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate your interest in this, and as I said, it's becoming a more of a national story because, as you've seen from the other calls that we've gotten from the national and international press this morning, there's a lot of conversation about asset allocation and where interest rates are and what your portfolio is yielding, but there's going to be a renewed effort, I think, on focusing on making sure that people aren't getting money out of the plan that don't deserve it, or things that are being done inside the plan that make the plan less sustainable. I'll go out on a limb and say the following. This is not just about the issues we're talking about. Any time that anyone purchases service into this pension plan, any time that someone makes a decision for let's say a 50% annuitant in their retirement, every time that is done, going back to lowering the assumed rate of return, that is done using a rate of return that this plan has not achieved on average in 20 years. So every one of those that happens, and does happen, that means that when we make those decisions to pay those people out this amount of money over there in someone else's life, every one of those decisions is being underpriced to the detriment of the plan. And I'll be glad to meet with you anytime, anywhere, any place to kind of walk you through the mathematics of that. But if I present an option to you for you to annuitize your pension based on your and your spouse's life expectancy, for instance, and I do that using a factor that we have not achieved, that means that we've underpriced that annuity. So all this rolls up, whether it's somebody cashing a deceased member's pension, whether it's somebody who's spiking their pension, whether it's how this discount rate impacts the distributions. And the reason that's important, especially for the newer callers on the call, is that this plan is paying out over $500 million every 30 days out of this pension plan. So all this stuff matters, and I appreciate your and the News and Observer's interest in this.
Any follow-up questions, Kern?
No, good.
Okay. Great, thank you. Does anyone else have a question for the treasurer? Okay, hearing none, the treasurer will make some final remarks.
Thank you all for joining us. I know it's a busy news day for lots of reasons. The General Assembly is, and lots of things going on in Raleigh as the General Assembly is anticipating coming back into session. We appreciate your renewed interest in this. And the other takeaway that I have from this call is that we owe all the folks on the call, those that did and those that didn't ask questions, what the funding implications are as far as lowering the assumed rate of return for the total retirement system. So we need to make sure that if we give the total retirement system number, we A, do that, but B, if we can break that down, because this portion of that's going to come from the state and this portion is going to come from the elder system. We appreciate you giving that I appreciate staff giving that to all the members of the press.